Good morning to everyone, and thank you all for making the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. A quick announcement before we officially begin. We are recording the webinar today, and also we will make both the presentation and the recording available following the call. We'll send that out to everybody within a couple of days here. So welcome to our webinar on the just about to be released non-residential alterations cost effectiveness study. I say just about to be released because we are updating, we are actually working on just a couple of things to make the report accessible, and we just about have it ready for publication. We should have it in the next day or so. So the timing here for the webinar is excellent. The study is just about to break, and it includes options for basically for encouraging the installation of heat pumps when replacing rooftop air conditioning units in non-residential occupancies, very like the single-family study that we've released earlier. The study authors and our presenters today are Lucy Albin, who's a senior research analyst, and Shannon Sumawan, a lead research engineer from TRC Companies. Lucy and Shannon are going to walk us through the study objectives, the development, and the results today. On our agenda, we have quite a bit to cover today, but this study is a little bit more focused than some of our other studies. We don't quite have as many measure and package options as we sometimes do. So we have a little bit more time on our webinar today, and so we encourage you to ask questions as they arise. Please don't hesitate. We have a relatively small group today also, so this is a great time to get your questions answered before you take the results and try to go out and do some outreach. Okay. So following my introduction here, we'll begin walking through the study. Lucy and Shannon will cover the study objectives and the scope, kind of the building prototype designs that are used and the methodology for the measures that were studied. And then finally, the study results and how that can be translated into an ordinance. Okay. Although the primary focus today is, or on the report, is air conditioner replacements, there are also other measures that could be applicable for an alteration, for other alterations in non-res occupancies too. So we'll be covering that as well. As most, if not all of you are aware, in order to adopt an ordinance that amends the energy code, the jurisdiction has to show that the ordinance will meet two requirements: save energy beyond the state code, and also that there's a cost-effective and non-preempted path to achieve those requirements. So in addition to meeting those legal requirements, though, the study really provides a lot of other valuable information during the ordinance development process. It allows jurisdictions to make some informed policy decisions, and also helps staff communicate the requirements and impacts to the stakeholders that are going to be impacted by that regulation. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Shannon Sumawan to get us started.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Misty. So hi everyone, my name is Shannon Sumawan, and I am one of the project managers for this study, along with my colleague Lucy Albin here. So yeah, I think we can get started now. The scope of this 2025 non-residential alteration study is mainly to perform cost-effectiveness analysis on existing small office and medium retail building type with single-zone AC unit. So our objective are to identify where single-zone heat pump replacements are cost-effective and evaluate measure packages for two specific scenarios: HVAC replacement and major alteration. As part of our methodology here, we evaluated energy efficiency measures, both standalone and as bundled measure packages, and this will be discussed in detail in later slides. We conducted the building energy modeling using CPAC 2025 software, where we replaced single-zone AC unit with single-zone heat pump unit. The simulation result allowed us to evaluate energy equivalency between single-zone heat pump and single-zone AC, and this was done to support the APCA compliance. Furthermore, we also collected cost data from manufacturers and contractors to assess the cost effectiveness and evaluate the technical feasibility of heat pump retrofits. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the new 2025 code language, which serves as the primary catalyst for our study. The new code required that all single-zone package rooftop unit with cooling capacity less than 65,000 kBtu/hour or equivalent to about 5 ton to get replaced by single-zone heat pump unit in select climate zones here, shown in the table. So it mostly applies to climate zone 3 to 13 and 15. So this gives us a room for potential rich code adoptions or opportunity to evaluate single zone heat pump replacement for units that are above 65,000 kBtu/hour in all climate zones. Yeah, next slide. So we are gonna go over the prototype and measures now. As mentioned, we are focusing on these two prototype right here. So medium retail and small office. There are three vintages that we simulated, starting from the oldest one, which is vintage 1980s, followed by vintage 1990s and vintage 2000s. So in the first table, we can see the comparison between the two prototypes in terms of conditioned floor area, the number of units, the number of stories, and also the window to floor area ratio. And we also include like a tiny picture to for reference. Next slide. So although this study primarily focused on medium retail and small office prototypes, the findings may be extended to other applicable building types. So to evaluate this applicability, we analyze occupancy schedule, occupancy density, load profiles, and minimum ventilation requirement from the CBEC library. So we found that the operation schedules are closely aligned, uh, which is a key factor considering that the outdoor air temperature determines the heat pump operational efficiency, as well as the impact of the efficiency measures we selected. While different building types have different occupant densities and process loads, designers can easily adjust unit capacities to account for the different loads. So for example, we specify smaller units for lower loads and larger units for higher loads. And because our analysis account for varying unit sizes in response to the magnitude of internal loads, our analysis should encapsulate all these other building prototypes that we list here with similar load profiles and occupancy schedules. So looking at the occupancy schedule chart here, we can see that medium retail and grocery, they share similar occupancy schedule types and load profile trend, as shown in the orange line. Likewise, small office align closely with large office, library, financial institutions in terms of schedule types and occupancy trend. And this is represented with the blue line. Schools, on the other hand, exhibit slightly different load profile and occupancy schedule compared to the other prototypes here, as shown in the green line. However, it may still be possible to apply the medium retail findings to school building with some extrapolations or adjustments. Next slide. So this is a visual depiction summary to what I just described earlier on the building applicability based on the occupancy schedule comparison and the load profile. So medium retail share similar occupancy schedule and load profile with grocery, small office with the three prototypes below that, and then school might be applicable to a certain extent. And the four prototypes on the far right have distinct load profiles and occupancy schedules, so we do not recommend applying this study to building prototypes such as restaurant, warehouse, hospitals, and hotels. Next slide. So this is the list of efficiency measures that we have evaluated so far. I will briefly describe each measure and the baseline and the proposed values that we are using in our modeling simulations, and we will cover measure packages in later slides, which will include a combination of these measures. So the first measure here is cool roof. This measure specifies solar reflectance exceeding the 2025 energy code section for low slope requirements when renovation scope is already included, replacing the roof. So it only applies in a medium retail prototype right now because small office with steep slope would already require to have full roof per the energy code. And yeah, for baseline, we are using 0.63, and for proposed, we kind of increase that to 0.7. For the second measure, it is the window film. This measure reduces window solar heat gain coefficient of existing windows by adding a window film. So in addition to reducing the solar heat gain, window film can serve as a safety and security measures for stabilizing broken glass. So for the baseline, the solar heat gain coefficient varies between vintages, but I included range here. Um, so yeah, that's the range that we are using for each vintage. And for the proposed, we are using 0.39 for the solar heat gain coefficient. And for the third measure, it will be lighting retrofit. So this measure is an additional improvement beyond the planned renovation scope, which replace the existing luminaires, and the measures reduces the existing light power density or LPD in select areas, representing the 2025 code minimum upgrades. So for baseline, we model 1.2 LPD for office spaces and 1.7 for retail spaces. And for proposed, we change that to 0.6 for office and 0.95 in retail spaces. The fourth measure is the demand controlled ventilation or DCV. So this measure implements DCV to reduce ventilation based on the actual occupancy for intermittent or high occupancy spaces using CO2 sensors. The DCV measures apply only to medium retail in this case. So we didn't model it for a small office since there are no package units serving only conference room zones. And the occupancy profile is otherwise relatively flat for small office, so it leaves little to no savings opportunities here. And for baseline, we simply don't have the DCV. And for proposed, we model a DCV with fixed temperature control and constant volume return fan. And the fifth measure is heat recovery ventilation, or HRV. This measure is mechanical device intended to remove air from buildings, simultaneously replacing it with outdoor air. And in the process of transferring the heat from the warmer to the colder airflow, yeah, pretty much just to help with the air transfers. And for the baseline, we don't have HRV model. And for proposed, we add wheel type HRV to the space conditioning system to reduce the heating and cooling demands of the building. So the last measure, we have economizer fault detection diagnostics, or economizer FDD. This measure restores existing economizers to be fully functional and installs standalone economizer FDD on existing air handling units with cooling capacity greater than 134,000 for vintage 1980 and 75,000 BTU-hour in vintage 1990s and 2000s. So this measure, we recognize that existing economizers are often non-functional. This means that the dampers often either failed, closed, or partially open. And for baseline, that's what we simulated. So we simulate a faulty economizer with this specifications right here. And for proposed, we fixed this issue and adjusted the max outdoor air to 1 and changed the economizer to differential dry bulb and integrated control. So these measures only apply to medium retail prototypes because small office cooling capacity is way below the required capacity to include the economizer in most of the zone. Next slide.
Excuse me, Shannon, before you move
Oh,
on,
sure.
there's somebody with a question here. John McHugh has a question. John?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And my apologies, I may have missed the when you first talked about buildings, but just wondering, for instance, for cool roof, are you not looking at a medium office? Because that would have a flat roof and would seem to be applicable.
Oh, we are this cool roof measures applied for the medium retail prototype. So that should have a low slope roof type, and as long as it has a low slope roof, this measure should be applicable.
Yeah, but the question I was asking was, isn't this measure applicable to a medium office, or are you just trying to look at a one given building type?
In this case, we only have small office prototype. We don't have medium office. And in small office prototype, it has a steep slope roof already. So based on the energy code requirement, it's already required to have a cool roof. So that's why we don't include the small office prototype here. But yeah, it only applies to a building with similar roof specifications. So in this case, if it has low slope, this measure could still apply.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what you're doing, but to me, it would expand significantly the potential market share of that particular measure. Kind of similarly for demand control ventilation, these apply to areas that have high population density. And so to me, one of the key spaces that you'd want to look at DCV is schools. And are you looking at schools for this, or is there some rationale about not looking at schools for DCV? Because that's kind of like a really obvious place that you'd want to use this.
I think the study for this project in particular, as mentioned, we only focus on two prototypes, but in real life scenario, I think most of this can be applied to other building types as such school, as you mentioned. But yeah, like unfortunately in this study, the prototype that we analyze are only kind of limited to medium retail and small office prototype.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I see a second.
Yeah, that's me, Suzanne. I have a question. So these are for existing buildings, but let's say you have a small office or medium office, and most of these buildings are separated into tenant spaces, multiple tenant spaces. Were these modeled with that in mind? Or did you model them as one tenant only? And then the entire building would be retrofitted? Or what would we do if we have an existing office building with multiple tenants?
Good question. I think for the modeling process on these prototypes, we have a condition zones. So the zones unfortunately do not include tenant spaces. So the condition zone for retail are 5 zones, and most of them are still retail zone spaces. For example, like point of sales, and then in the mid, like the point of sales, and then the core zones, and then we have the different other smaller zones like the back spaces. And similarly for small office, we have 4 zones, and those zones are still part of the office spaces. So I think in this case, like unfortunately we don't have any tenant spaces modeled, but sorry, I'm looking at some of the questions that popping up here. And yeah, so there are like 5 condition zones for the medium retail, and then 4 small zones for the small office prototype.
This is Farhad with TRC. Suzanne, it's a great question. The efficiency measures are whole building, so they would go across all tenant spaces, and that would be a building owner decision to implement, and that would be during something that's happening with a project that's encompassing the whole building, all tenant spaces. As Shannon mentioned, we're just assuming one tenant in the whole building, for simplicity here. But when practicality comes with segmented tenant improvements, I don't think these efficiency measures would apply, except for the single zone package units, because those are tied specifically to a zone, like Shannon was describing, and those are much more commonly for one tenant space.
Alrighty, thank you very much, everybody. John, I'm going to ask if this is super related, but I'd like to let Shannon be able to go on. If not, can we do this in the chat or if possible?
The chat works just fine.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. So that Shannon can go on a little bit. Thank you. Go ahead, Shannon.
Thank you. Yeah, next slide, Lucy. So I'll hand it over to Lucy, who will provide an overview of the measure packages description and different packages that we have here.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you everyone for your attendance today and some great questions already. My name's Lucy Albin. I'm with TRC, and I'll be covering this next section where we will cover the measure packages that we considered as part of the REACH code analysis. So we'll cover each package in more detail in the following slides, but first I wanted to give a high-level overview of the different types of packages we considered. And notably, there are two types of REACH codes that we analyzed for this report, so I want to make that distinction clear. The first type is an individual measure REACH code, so this would be just adding a specific measure to the existing building with the existing building prototype as the baseline for comparison. We will report these results out separately, although the cost effectiveness results of these individual measures did also assist us in determining the measure packages for the second type of REACH code, which is related to the packaged RTU equipment replacement. And that is the main focus of this report and analysis. So all of the measure packages are really based on that type of REACH code. The baseline for this REACH code would be a code minimum RTU replacement, which we refer to as a single zone AC replacement or a mixed fuel replacement. But I do want to clarify that this is representative of the prescriptive code minimum, as Shannon shared earlier. So there may be some heat pumps included in this baseline, depending on the climate zone and the unit capacity. In terms of the measure packages, we considered adding measures, bundled measures to the same space heating equipment used in the baseline, so that single zone AC, one with HVAC only related measures, and a bundled efficiency measure package, which also included window film and lighting retrofit measures. Then we also considered measure packages with the heat pump space heating equipment, which would extend the existing code requirements to include higher capacities and all climate zones. And then we also analyzed that heat pump package with HVAC only measures as well. So for the individual measures, we considered, as Shannon shared earlier, the cool roof, window film, lighting retrofit, and economizer FDD. And as stated, the baseline for all of these individual measure packages is the existing building with the existing space heating equipment. Shannon covered this as well, but we did not model the cool roof and economizer FDD measures on the small office due to assumptions in the prototype. We talked about the cool roof, which has a steep slope roof, so that already meets the cool roof aged solar reflectance values in the code. And then for the economizer FDD, this would only be relevant to units that already have an economizer. So the small office has units that are below that capacity and would not have economizers in the existing building. So moving on to the measure packages here, and these are analyzed again to support the RTU replacement REACH code. So the baseline for all of these packages would be the code minimum equipment replacement. And again, that is a single zone heat pump for units 5 tons or below in climate zones 3 through 13 and 15, and single zone ACs elsewhere. We ran several measure packages with the same proposed HVAC system. First, we wanted to consider HVAC-related measures only, and we determined these to be HRV and DCV, which we analyzed both separately and together. And the reason for this is that the assumptions for the small office prototype do not contain any units serving zones with high occupancy spaces, such as conference rooms, and the occupancy profile is otherwise relatively flat, so there weren't opportunities for occupancy-based savings there. So we wanted to present both with and without the DCV. We also considered a broader bundled efficiency measure package, which added on window film and lighting retrofit. And then for the heat pump replacement packages, we considered, as I mentioned, expanding the upper threshold from that code language from 5 tons to 20 tons and expanding to all climate zones. For climate zones where this is not cost effective, we also considered a scenario where it was extended only to 10 tons, which I will explain further in the coming slides. And then finally, we also wanted to consider a package with HVAC measures only as a way to achieve cost effectiveness when that first heat pump package was not cost effective on its own. And we knew from the mixed fuel results that the HRV measure was not cost effective on its own. So adding this measure would not contribute positively to climate zones where the heat pump was already not cost effective, which left us with the DCV measure only. And as we've covered, we were only able to simulate this in the retail prototype. So this graphic provides an overview of the measure applicability that we've discussed so far, just for visualization purposes. So for the individual efficiency measures, as you can see, we have those 4 measures, 2 of which only apply to the retail prototype. And then for the bundled efficiency measures, you can see that the window film and lighting retrofit are common to both prototypes. And for the HVAC measures, which are shown here in bold, HRV applies to both. And as discussed, DCV was modeled in medium retail only. So throughout this study, we also collected cost estimates for both the single zone AC and the single zone heat pump equipment from wholesale distributors and contractors. And we collected both material and labor costs, which are shown on this graph here, which has the comparative costs for different capacities, as well as the incremental cost, which is shown on the black line near the bottom. And as we can see here, this shows that heat pumps are actually less expensive than their mixed fuel equivalent for smaller sized units in the 3 to 5 ton range. At that point, the mixed fuel equipment becomes greater, but the 2 costs stay relatively similar and relatively close up until 10 tons, where you can see that incremental cost jump up and see that gap widen with the heat pumps becoming more expensive. This incremental cost increase is also why we chose to analyze that scenario where heat pumps were expanded up to 10 tons in addition to the 20 tons, because prototypes that would have larger units might have more difficulty achieving cost effectiveness due to this sharp increase. In addition to the equipment costs, we also collected costs for each of the measures that we analyzed, which is summarized here. So these costs are from a variety of sources, including distributors, market data, RS means, some TRM sources. And this is just an example because costs will vary from prototype to prototype based on unit capacities and other factors. So we recommend referring to the report for more specifics, but wanted to give a sense of what these these measure costs are looking like. I also wanted to note that these are incremental first costs. So we also had to consider the equipment useful life and when the measures would need to be replaced over the 30-year period. So you can see on the rightmost column there, we have the assumed lifetime of each equipment, which we used in the analysis. And at this point, I will hand it back to my colleague Shannon to cover the cost effectiveness results of these packages. But before diving into the results, I wanted to pause and see if any other questions have come up as we went through those different package definitions.
Lucy, there are a couple of questions actually in the chat here, primarily around the cost for the equipment. Ted asked what the bump was for the 12.5 ton threshold. And I think Farhad just answered that. He noted that it was from primarily the solenoid valve design, but that we may need to dig into that more. But there are a couple other questions here. Sorry about that. I was going to read that one and Farhad answered it right as I was reading it. There is another question from Barry on whether or not anyone has a perspective about whether the incremental cost for those larger units would decline if a single zone heat pump were more common in that size range. Is the incremental cost physical or does it represent limited sales volumes? Do you guys have any feel for that at all?
No, that's something that I think some of our project partners, like those at Cal MTA, the market transformation initiatives that their work over spans of 10 years or more, would have better insight on. That's the kind of thing that they're attempting to navigate, figuring out why these costs are different and how to bring them down. My sense is it's not necessarily because it's a more or less common size range. I come back to what we heard from distributors and saying that something about the physics requires different kinds of components for that valve that allows for the reversing from air conditioner mode to heat pump mode. We do not have the resources to dig further into that. I do think that it is worth digging further into, and ultimately the costs across several manufacturers, we looked at I think 3 different ones. They all were fairly consistent in this regard, and we were using some average results across those manufacturers.
Great. Thanks for that additional information, Farhad. That's really helpful. Okay, we had one more question for you, Lucy. Are the costs for a particular climate zone, or how did you guys deal with that variation?
Yes, good question. As I noted, those were just examples, so it would vary for climate zone. That example was climate zone 12, I believe, that we use as an example, and that's because that climate zone was consistent across the prototypes and the vintages. There were some climate zones where a vintage might not be represented if all of the units were below 5 tons and would therefore already be heat pumps in the baseline. So we wanted to have a climate zone that had all of the measures available for a point of comparison. But they did differ by climate zone, again, dependent on unit size, but also we used some adjustment factors as well for that.
Great, thank you. And then we have one last question here from John. Does electrical capacity have to increase, or does equipment capacity have to increase in the change?
Yeah, this is Farhad. I can jump in on this one. We interviewed a handful of designers and a distributor, a manufacturer's representative on these topics. And we also did some building simulation analysis. So there's a couple of ways that, these two answers are intertwined. The electrical capacity might need to increase due to two reasons. One is that the heating capacity, the heating demand for the building is going to be larger than the cooling demand. Or if it gets so cold that the heat pump is not able to perform and you need some sort of backup strip heating, or if you need to run a defrost cycle with electric resistance that previously wasn't there with the furnace. So all of those may have implications on the electrical capacity. I think in short, we examined all of those, and this will be documented in the report, and we did not find conclusive evidence that that's going to be the case. We generally found that the heating capacity was lower than the cooling capacity in nearly all cases when we looked statewide for these particular building types and for this for this mechanical equipment. And we also found that strip heating and defrost are most likely to occur kind of in the middle of the night, in that early morning when the building is not occupied. So running that heat pump in reverse for a little bit longer in order to defrost the coil would not lead to comfort impacts, while effectively being able to defrost that coil and not needing that extra electrical capacity.
Thank you, Farhad. So for the most part, it sounds like this should be a fairly straightforward changeover from that perspective anyway.
In theory, I think that the folks that we spoke with thought in depth about these questions and gave us solutions because we were trying to make this work. And I think that there's still a great amount of contractor education and design education still needed because strip heating, defrost cycles is standard, and it's going to require a change in thinking for that.
I agree. And John just clarified that he actually had a more specific question, which is he was asking about the capacity of the circuit serving the heat pump.
Right. So, and that gets back to the cooling capacity versus the heating capacity. So in the existing building scenario, there is going to be an air conditioner with a furnace, and we'd be retrofitting that with a heat pump instead. And that air conditioner would the electrical capacity for the tonnage of cooling that will provide the tonnage of cooling necessary for that air conditioner. We found through CBEC simulations would be sufficient for the heating capacity as well, because that cooling capacity was higher. The BTUH output of the cooling was higher.
Okay. Thank you very much, Farhad. That is, I believe we've gone through all the questions in the chat now. Any other questions out there before we move on? All righty, I think back to you, Shannon.
Thank you, Missy. And thank you, Farhad, for helping us answering some of the questions here. So prior to presenting the cost effectiveness result, I'd like to kind of like go into defining our two approaches that we use in our analysis. So our study used both on-bill and long-term system-wide costs of energy-based approaches to evaluate cost effectiveness. So both on-bill and LSC requires estimating and quantifying the energy savings and costs associated with energy measures. And the primary difference between these two metrics is how energy is valued. So for on-bill, as we see here, the first one, it represents customer-based lifecycle cost approach that values energy based upon estimated site energy use and customer on-bill savings using electricity and natural gas utility rate schedules over a 30-year durations of the prototypes. And this should account for a 3% discount rate and energy cost inflation. For LSC, or long-term system-wide costs, this was formerly known as time-dependent valuations, or I think most of us here knows it as TDV. So this was developed by the Energy Commissions, and the way that LSC savings are calculated, we are using the hourly LSC factors for both electricity and natural gas provided by the CEC. So these LSC hourly factors are projected over the 30-year life of the building and incorporate the hourly costs of marginal generation, transmission and distribution, fuel capacity, losses, and cap and trade based CO2 emissions. Next slide, Lucy. Okay, so before we jump into the result, I'd like to highlight the different cell color legends that we are using here, which I also include at the bottom of the table. So essentially, the results shown in green shadings indicate that the result is cost-effective in terms of both on-bill and LSC. Results shows in yellow shading indicate that the results is either cost-effective in on-bill or LSC, respectively. The results without any shading and a dash or hyphen there indicate that the result is not cost-effective in both on-bill and LSC. Lastly, results that are shown in gray shading indicate that the package or measure is not applicable. For example, if there are no relevant tonnage of equipment in vintage or climate zones requirement. Yeah, so now this is the cost effectiveness result for the individual efficiency measures applied to existing mixed wheel small office prototype. We can see at the very top that window film results look a bit mixed, where it is mostly cost effective in terms of both metrics in coastal climate zones, while the rest are mostly on-bill cost effective. So this measure doesn't apply to vintage 2000s because the baseline assumption for vintage 2000 already exceeded the proposed values. And for lighting retrofit, it is mostly on-bill cost effective in most climate zones, except climate zone 6, 8, and 9. So this result are not surprising considering that lighting is not a primary load in small office, unlike the other prototype, which is medium retail. Next slide. The next table shows the cost effectiveness result for small office single zone AC package. So the mixed wheel efficiency package here is mostly either on-bill or LSC cost effective in all applicable climate zones across the 3 vintages. So here we do see a package optimization happening where we only include measures that are either cost effective in LSC or TDV in addition to energy savings. So due to this package optimization, there are some climate zones excluded because there are no cost-effective measures that are applicable, as seen in the gray out cell here in this table. And as Lucy mentioned in the early slide before, the mixed fuel HRV package is not presented in this table because it is not cost-effective in any of the climate zones across the 3 vintages. However, it is essential for the alternative pathway to achieve LSC equivalency. The result for the MF HRV packages are included in the result workbook, and I encourage everyone to explore the workbook for references when it is published later. Next slide, please. So the next table here shows the cost effectiveness result for small office single zone heat pump package. So the heat pump package is cost effective in both metrics across most climate zones and vintages. At least the applicable ones. And we do see a lot of gray cell here for vintage 1990s and 2000s because only a select climate zones are applicable, as most of the units for those climate zones in vintage, the latest 2 vintages, they are mostly 5 tons or below, which are the prescriptively required to be heat pump under the 2025 code. Next slide. And this next table shows the cost effectiveness result for individual efficiency measures applied to the existing mixed wheel medium retail prototype. So as seen here, cool roof measures is mostly on-bill cost effective in all climate zones except climate zone 16s, and it is not applicable in climate zone 1 and 3. The result is expected as climate zone 16 is a relatively cold climate zone, and it becomes cost-effective in both metrics, starting on climate zone 5 to 15, which kind of like more on the warmer climate zones. Window film results are a bit mixed, but it displays similar trend with small office, where it is mostly on-bill cost-effective and in most climate zones and vintages, but becomes cost-effective in both metrics in coastal climate zones. So it is not cost-effective in colder climate zones like climate zone 1 and 16, which is also expected because it's again like a colder climate zone. Lighting retrofit and economizer FDD measures are mostly on-bill and LSC cost-effective in all climate zones and villages where they are applicable. So lighting retrofit in particular, it shows better cost-effectiveness compared to the small office prototype because lighting is one of the primary or like the major load in a medium retail prototype. Next slide, please. So this table here shows the cost effectiveness result for the single zone AC medium retail measures package. And the mixed fuel efficiency package here is cost effective in terms of LSC and on bill in most climate zones and vintages. Here we also see another package optimization where we only include measures that are either cost effective in LSC or TDV in addition to energy savings. And at the bottom there, the mixed fuel HRV DCV package is cost-effective in both metrics in select climate zones, but partially cost-effective in coastal climate zones in terms of on-bill. And mostly this is due to the smaller savings compared to the high incremental costs that is associated with this package. Next slide. So lastly, this table shows the cost effectiveness result for the single zone heat pump packages for medium retail. The heat pump package is mostly cost effective in terms of on bill in some climate zones in the 1980s and 1990s vintage. The climate zones where the packages is not cost effective here is partly due to the large incremental first cost of switching from single zone heat pump system for the larger capacity above the 10 ton. So this kind of aligned with what Lucy presented in the equipment cost chart earlier, where we do see a spike after the 10 ton cutoff. And the single zone heat pump retrofit becomes cost effective in most climate zones in vintage 2000. And this is because of the lower incremental costs associated with the smaller system sizes. Comparing this with the heat pump 10 package, which is the middle one there, where only unit at 10 ton or below are replaced with single zone heat pump, we can see a lot of improvement in the cost effectiveness in terms of LSC and on bill in most applicable climate zones. Next slide, please. Oh, do you mind going back before Lucy yeah. On the last package on the heat pump DCV measures, like the cost effectiveness for this package is mostly on bill cost effective in most climate zones and vintages, with the exception of climate zones 6, 7, 8, and 15 in select vintages. Next slide. So this is a summary slide of the cost effectiveness result. It pretty much sums up what most of the findings I've shared in the previous slide. So for small office, the result appeared to be mixed for window film and lighting retrofit, where it is mostly on bill cost effective. I also mentioned that lighting isn't a primary load in small office, so we don't see as much savings compared to retail. And for small office single zone AC package, the result is only cost effective in either one of the metrics. And this is due to the package optimization that we kind of like did during the modeling process. And for single zone heat pump package, the result is cost effective in both metrics in most applicable climate zones. And moving on to retail, we also had a mix of result for the window film, but it has similar trend with small office where it is on bill and LSC cost effective in coastal climate zone. Lighting retrofit and economizer are mostly cost effective in both metrics for the most part. The single zone AC and heat pump packages are mostly cost effective in terms of LSC and on bill, though there are some climate zones with on bill only cost effective. And for the mixed fuel HRV DCV package in particular, this is mainly due to the smaller savings compared to the higher incremental costs. And for the heat pump 10 package, we do see a lot of improvement when we target units that are 10 ton or below. In the cost effectiveness result, yeah, we do see a lot of improvements there. And overall, when comparing all the single zone AC packages between the two prototypes, we are seeing greater cost effectiveness in both LSC and on bill for retail compared to small office. And this is mainly attributed to more applicable measures in retail packages and the opposite trend kind of like shown when comparing the heat pump, single zone heat pump packages between the two prototypes, where we see greater cost effectiveness in both metrics for small office. And this is due to the incremental package cost of switching from to a single zone heat pump HVAC for units over 10 tons. So yeah. Next slide, Lucy. So now I will transition the presentation back to Lucy to cover the rich code pathways, options, and recommendations.
Before we let you go, Shannon, there are a couple
Sure.
of questions in the chat for you. If
Let me
we can
see.
take just a minute to answer those.
Yeah, let me see.
Yeah, one question is from John. He asked if you could describe the single zone AC package again. What measures are in that?
Yeah, so the single zone AC package, let me, Lucy, do you mind going back to the early, yeah. So yeah, for the single zone AC package, here we have the mixed fuel efficiency package. So this includes a bundle of measures. So for single zone AC package in medium retail, it includes, I believe, window film, lighting retrofit, and DCV. And for the mixed fuel HRV DCV package, I think the package name already kind of highlights the measures that comes in there. So the mixed fuel HRV DCV only include those two measures, HRV and DCV.
I'll also just add on more generally, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of have two buckets of packages, the single zone AC and the single zone heat pump, which refers to the space heating equipment, and the specific measures may vary, but when we're referring to single zone AC packages, generally that means that the space heating equipment will be the same as the baseline, which is the code minimum prescriptive requirements. Generally single zone ACs, but does also include heat pumps in some of those scenarios. So hopefully that helps clarify.
Alrighty, thank you. Okay, and
yeah.
there's
and just to add a little bit more there, since like I think John has two questions.
Yep.
So yeah, the thermostat includes a setback. Yeah.
It does not, or it does?
It does. It does. It does.
It does. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. That's the standard Title 24 schedule, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. I think those were the only questions in the chat. Are there any other questions for Shannon on the cost effectiveness results before we move on to how you might change those into a reach code? Okay. And hearing none, I say we go ahead and move on. I think Lucy, you're going to take it from here. Is that right?
Yes, sounds good. Thank you, Misty, and thank you, Shannon. So before we dive into the reach code results and recommendations, I want to set the scene by describing the framework that we use to analyze the RTU reach code, which includes when the reach code would apply, the prescriptive pathways, and what metrics to evaluate. So first, the trigger for when this reach code would apply would be a new or replacement single zone AC RTU in existing buildings. Then for each reach code option, we have two prescriptive pathways. The first must be cost effective over the 30-year period, as Shannon described those metrics with the cost effectiveness just now. And the second alternative pathway must achieve energy equivalency by meeting or exceeding the LSC savings of the primary pathway. And the way that we considered this for the reach codes is generally the heat pump package would be the first pathway, so that would have to be cost effective. And then the single zone AC alternative approach for compliance would have to meet or exceed that energy equivalency. So we considered three different options for this RTU reach code, again, each with two pathways to comply. First, we looked at expanding heat pumps up to 20 tons as that primary path, cost-effective path, and compared this to the single zone AC with HVAC measures as the energy equivalent pathway. When this reach code option didn't meet one or both of the metrics described here, we would also consider options 2 or 3. Option 2 is the same as option 1, but the only difference would be in that cost-effective pathway, the single zone heat pumps would expand up to 10 tons only rather than 20 tons. Again, we thought that would cut off a lot of the issues with the cost effectiveness due to those larger equipment having a greater incremental cost. And then for option 3, the primary path is the heat pumps extended up to 20 tons, as in the first option, but adding on the HVAC measures, which in this case was DCV. And the second pathway here is the single zone AC equipment with the broader bundle of efficiency measures, including window film and lighting retrofit. So this is how we decided to report out the results of this RTU reach code option 1. So in each column here, you can see that we have a count of the prototypes that we could analyze and a count of those prototypes that meet the conditions specified for the pathway. As we've mentioned, some prototypes might not be analyzed for a specific scenario if either the unit capacities already require heat pumps in the baseline, so there's no heat pump measure there and nothing to evaluate, or if a measure is not applicable. Specifically, again, we see this with DCV as we're considering these reach codes. So that is why the number may vary between the 2 prototypes and 3 vintages. In theory, the maximum would be 6, but you may see lower numbers than that, just depending on those specifics. And then I also did just want to add in a reminder here that this is just based on the prototype assumptions, but actual buildings may vary from these assumptions, again, specifically related to that DCV. So just because we weren't able to model that for this prototype does not necessarily mean that it is not applicable to that building type, but just something to keep in mind. So this is reach code option 1. So the first column here is showing the count of prototypes that are cost effective when the heat pump is extended up to 20 tons. So just looking at the first row there, we were able to analyze 6 prototypes and 6 of those were cost effective. Then moving further to the right, we considered the alternative pathway. We have both HRV alone and the HRV DCV here. We wanted to present both of these HVAC measure package options because one may show different cost effectiveness results, but also the number of prototypes that we were able to analyze is different. So I think both should be considered and taken into account. And for these columns, the count that we're seeing is the prototypes that were able to achieve LSC equivalency. So again, on that first row, applying just HRV to the single zone AC space heating equipment, we were able to still analyze all 6 prototypes, but we found that only 3 were able to meet or achieve that LSC equivalency. As compared to if we added both HRV and DCV, again, we would only have the 3 prototypes to analyze in this scenario, but we did see that all 3 of those were able to achieve LSC equivalency with the heat pump primary pathway. So more generally, as you can see, there's some varied results here, specifically with the cost effectiveness. And we would want to see both of these pathways meeting in order for that to be a recommended pathway for each climate zone. And also just quickly wanted to cover the colors here. So the green means that 100% of the prototypes that we were able to analyze met those conditions of either cost effectiveness or energy equivalency. Going down the yellow means over 75% were able to meet those conditions. The light red is 50 to 75, and the dark red is 50% or below if those prototypes were able to meet the conditions specified for that pathway. So moving on to RTU reach code option number 2. And as you'll recall, this is the same as option 1, except for the heat pump is extended up to 10 tons only rather than 20 tons. So we are seeing much greater cost effectiveness here in the first column. There's only one climate zone that did not see cost effectiveness for each of the prototypes that were analyzed. But with that greater cost effectiveness, we are also seeing that there are less prototypes analyzed in some cases. And that's because when we're looking at a smaller range of equipment capacities that this applies to, there may be some prototypes that fall off if they don't have units within that range. So for example, climate zone 8, on the previous slide for option 1, we saw that there were 5 prototypes analyzed and 3 of those were cost effective. And here we see that only 4 were analyzed, but all 4 were cost effective. So there are some trade-offs there. But generally we are seeing, like I said, generally cost effective with one exception. And then moving on to the alternative pathway for energy equivalency, HRV, DCV, again, always is able to achieve the energy equivalency, but there are fewer packages. Sometimes only one was able to be analyzed. And with HRV alone, we're seeing somewhat mixed results, although generally more than half, I would say, are able to meet that energy equivalency. And then finally, moving on to RTU reach code option 3. And as you'll recall, this option shows for the primary pathway, the heat pump up to 20 tons with the DCV measure versus the single zone AC with the bundled efficiency package. So because of the modeling limitations with DCV, this option does have the fewest prototypes available for analysis. And we are seeing some mixed results there, though generally cost effective, with a handful of exceptions for certain climate zones. And the mixed fuel with the bundled efficiency measure package, which again, that includes the HVAC measures, as well as window film and lighting retrofit. So we are definitely seeing across the board that those bundled measures are able to achieve the LSC equivalent. And then finally, I just wanted to have this summary slide here, which combines each of the 3 options presented on the prior slides, just for visual purposes only, visualization purposes. So I would still recommend referring to the other tables and the report for more specifics, but the point that we wanted to show here is that for each row across, which is each climate zone, there's at least one green square, meaning one reach code option that was cost effective and energy equivalent for all of the prototypes analyzed. Right, and we'll end with some general conclusions and next steps here, and then we'll pause again for some more questions. So putting all of that together, our findings, starting with the small office prototype, we found that the single zone heat pump replacements are cost effective in all climate zones and vintages. And the HRV measure is not cost effective with the single zone AC replacement. For medium retail, we found that the single zone heat pump replacements were cost effective where units are 10 tons or less, and that vintages with the larger equipment above 10 tons would have more varied results. Adding the DCV measure would achieve cost effectiveness in some of those climate zones, but not all. And that the HRV and DCV measures are mainly cost effective with the single zone AC replacement. Overall, for both prototypes, we found that the energy efficiency measures are cost effective depending on the prototype, climate zone, and vintage, as Shannon shared earlier. We also found that the bundled efficiency measure package is mainly cost effective with the single zone AC space heating equipment. And finally, we found that there are viable RTU reach code pathways available for all climate zones. Now, as Shannon mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we also wanted to consider how to apply the results of this analysis and these two prototypes to other building types with similar profiles, which has some benefits and also some limitations. So for pros, the HVAC measures we considered, which are HRV and DCV, are readily available and easy to install. And they're also used for energy equivalency, not cost effectiveness, due to the prescriptive pathways that we laid out. Also, all of the occupancies in the relevant section have similar schedules, which makes applying these results simpler. And although there might be different internal loads for building types with similar occupancy schedules, because our analysis is based on unit sizes and not the internal load directly, we can adjust the capacities to account for this, or the designer could account for this with adjusting the capacities, which adds flexibility. There's also precedence from previous reports to extrapolate results to other building types in this way. And again, because the study focuses on unit sizes rather than compliance margin, is not bound by compliance margin, that gives us more flexibility, and almost all of this, the applications of this REACH code can comply through the prescriptive pathway, as we were able to demonstrate. Now, for some of the cons and limitations, as we've mentioned several times, we did have limited prototype testing for the HRV and DCV measures bundled together, and we only had the retail results to show for that. Again, the small office didn't have those energy impacts to show because of the flat load profile, but in reality, offices may have conference rooms that have its own dedicated unit, in which case DCV may be implemented. And the prescriptive approach makes the most sense for this this type of REACH code because of the large variation in the existing building stock and some limitations with the CBEC software and the prototype assumptions. That makes a performance-based approach impractical and difficult to implement. Finally, we would need to conduct further analysis for individual efficiency measures because they're often up to code rather than exceeding code. So if considering a FlexPath type approach, we could consider lighting as a prerequisite, for example, but again, this would require further analysis. All right, so next steps, as Misty mentioned earlier, the report is coming very soon, so keep your eye out for that. And then we are also working to integrate these results into the cost effectiveness explorer tool over the coming months. So keep your eye out for those developments, and we would love you all to check out the report when it becomes available. But in the meantime, that's all we have prepared for today. So we want to thank you for your time and attention, and pause here for any further questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Lucy. We do have one question left in the chat here from the last section here, and that is regarding the DCV measure. The question is that it's not applied to office occupancies due to low occupant density, but could occupied standby apply?
John, this is Farhad with TRC. John, can you describe occupied standby? It's not a term that I've come across too often.
Sure. So occupied standby is when the HVAC system is programmed to be on, but the occupants have left the room. So they've and these are for rooms where you need an occupancy sensor to sense that. And if the rooms are empty, then there's a specific table in ASHRAE 62.1 which allows you to turn the ventilation all the way to off. Now, in the case of a single zone system, you would just turn the fan off. And so I'm thinking, so offices, the problem with DCV in offices is the occupant density isn't high enough. You need to maintain a minimum flow rate when people are there, right, to deal with the space generated pollutants. So even though your occupancy is decreased, you're unable to decrease the total flow rate because of that. I guess they call it what is the area ventilation rate.
Mm-hmm.
But for these spaces that have low occupant density and are sort of covered by that table, if you have occupancy sensors in the zone and the zone is fully unoccupied, then you can turn the fan all the way off. And I was just thinking that this was an application that would seem to make sense for those, for the office prototype.
That's a good point. Thanks, John, for that. I don't believe we tested, and Shannon, Lucy, y'all can correct me if needed. I don't believe we tested occupancy sensors tied to the HVAC system. I don't think that they would give us substantially different impacts because we're dealing with than demand control ventilation, because we can't change the load profiles, the occupancy profiles of the prototype. But that said, I think that it could make sense to have that approach, occupancy sensors, as potentially an exemption or an alternative way to comply with the REACH code that could be based on its cost effectiveness, because it would be doing the same thing as demand control ventilation. So I could see it being as an alternative compliance pathway.
While I've got the microphone on, I just thought I'd ask. I was typing. One of the benefits of the heat recovery ventilator seems to be that in your colder climates, that may obviate the need for increasing the size of your system, right? Because you're, instead of bringing in cold outside air, you're actually bringing in preheated outside air, especially during that morning warm-up time. So just something to think about in terms of, I know like in Washington State, I believe the heat recovery, that was part of the benefits of the heat recovery with DOAS was specifically to reduce those loads. And so then your capacities might be lower.
I think that's a great point as well. We didn't test that specifically. We did find that there were energy savings, obviously, and that's probably largely due to the effect that you described. And we didn't have to test for cost effectiveness. Not that you brought this up, but we didn't have to test for cost effectiveness because this is the alternative pathway, the secondary pathway. Usually, HRV is much more common in high ventilation loads, high internal load type of environments, and which is not these types of buildings that we're looking at here. But there was a noticeable impact, and I think you're right. There could be a designer could take that into account to try to reduce some cost, and that might actually improve cost effectiveness. But we didn't examine that on our side. So thanks for bringing that up.
All righty. Excellent. Thank you, John, and thanks, Farhad. Those are all the questions that we have in the chat. Are there any other questions for either Lucy or Shannon? Alrighty, hearing none. I think that brings us to the end of the webinar today. And so as Lucy was noting, there are certainly opportunities within each climate zone here. It looks like there's a sweet spot in this equipment packages for the single zone systems that are between 5 and 10 tons. They seem to actually perform the best here. So there's opportunities for the HVAC changeout, as well as some opportunities for other measures here for other alterations if you're interested in something like that. There were the lighting measure, as well as the window film and economizer as well. And so there are some things that you can do now to start preparing for an ordinance. One thing that tends to be very helpful is if you have any sort of official policy directive or goal objective stated, that can provide a lot of support to your effort and legitimacy as well. It can actually shift the narrative, especially with many internal stakeholders, from something that a single person is promoting to a stated jurisdiction policy and objective that you're now implementing. So depending on how your data is collected in your jurisdiction and how you can access it, you should probably start looking at some existing building stock and recent permit data to see what kind of activities you have and what might suit your jurisdiction best. And then, of course, with every ordinance, begin communicating with stakeholders early, both those who support the ordinance and those who may be opposed. And recommend you maintain that dialogue throughout the process. It can be really, really helpful in your efforts to talk with stakeholders and incorporate their concerns, and really to help mold and refine the ordinance language. So that said, we are, as we noted, producing several resources to help support these efforts. Like I said, we are wrapping up just a couple of things that we need to do to make the report accessible. It's all done. It just needs to get a couple of formatting changes done, and we'll have it posted within the next day or so. We'll send out a link with the presentation as well as a link to the recording shortly after this, within a day or two. And just a reminder that we also have some materials for ordinances that are focused on existing single-family homes available. We have some we have a study as well as model ordinance language and a staff report that is available for the single-family version of this ordinance, the single-family AC to heat pump. And that's at the link that I just left, as well as several different resources for the FlexPath ordinance, which is the ordinance that is focused on existing single-family homes that are undergoing alterations other than just a simple equipment changeout. So I dropped both of those links in the chat. And of course, our entire team is always here to help answer any questions you have or provide support for you as you start making your way through the process. So again, thank you very much to Shannon and Lucy, and to their supporting team, Farhad and Avni back there, and also to each of you for making the time to attend the webinar today. We really do appreciate it and hope that it was helpful for you. Hope you all have a great day, and I look forward to talking with you soon. Thank you very much.